The Utah desert has always held an air of mystery, an unforgiving landscape where beauty and danger walk hand in hand. Under the vast, cloudless sky, the horizon stretches endlessly, broken only by the jagged silhouettes of red rock formations and the silence of centuries. It was here, in this land of extremes, that two brothers vanished without a trace. For 3 long years, the desert kept its secret, until one of them re-emerged with a story that would forever change how survival is understood. Before we go further into this journey, if you enjoy stories of resilience, mystery, and the human spirit, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Each story we tell is a reminder that real life often holds greater suspense than fiction, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The brothers' names were Ethan and Ryan Miller. Ethan, the older at 28, was the steady one, disciplined, cautious, and carrying the weight of responsibility since their father passed away. Ryan, 4 years younger, lived by a different rhythm. Restless, idealistic, and brimming with confidence, he believed the world was there to be conquered by sheer will. Their bond was strong, though often tested by differences in temperament. Like many siblings, they balanced one another, Ethan grounding Ryan, Ryan pushing Ethan toward adventure. That summer, they set their sights on Utah's Canyonlands, a place both of them had dreamed of exploring since childhood. The desert was not just a landscape to them, it was a proving ground, a place where they hoped to find clarity about who they were and where they were headed. Ethan had recently been promoted at his job in Salt Lake City, a role that demanded focus and routine. Ryan, meanwhile, was struggling with direction after dropping out of college, eager to prove himself in ways that books and classrooms never could. Their family had mixed feelings about the trip. Their mother, Linda, remembered too well the desert hikes her late husband once took them on. She warned them about the merciless sun, the deceptive distances, the way the desert lured people into believing they were safe until it was too late. "Promise me you'll stay on the marked trails," she insisted, pressing Ethan's hand as though she could anchor him with the strength of her worry. Jessica, a close family friend who had known the brothers since high school, was even more direct. "Ethan, Ryan, don't take this lightly. People get lost out there all the time. The desert doesn't care about how strong or smart you are. It just waits." Her voice carried both fear and frustration, though it was Ryan who dismissed her concerns with a grin. "Relax, Jess, we'll be fine. It's just a hike, not a death sentence." Ethan wasn't so quick to laugh. He knew the desert demanded respect, but he also felt a sense of duty. Maybe this trip would give Ryan the focus he lacked, a chance to channel his energy into something meaningful. Maybe it would help them reconnect as brothers, away from the noise of everyday life. When the morning came, the sun rose over Moab like a blazing torch, painting the cliffs in hues of gold and crimson. The brothers adjusted their backpacks, tightened their shoelaces, and stepped onto the trail with determination in their stride. Their shadows stretched long behind them, fading into the red dust as if the desert itself were swallowing their past. Neither Ethan nor Ryan could have imagined what awaited them, how quickly their laughter would give way to silence, how their bond would be tested beyond anything they had ever known. The desert has a way of stripping life down to its essentials, and for the Miller brothers it would expose truths neither of them were ready to face. And so began their journey, a path marked not just by footsteps in the sand, but by choices that would echo for years. They walked into the vastness with hope in their hearts, unaware that only one of them would walk out again. Ethan Miller often said his earliest memories were tied to the smell of campfire smoke clinging to his father's old flannel shirts. Those nights under the stars, when their father taught them how to pitch a tent, trace constellations, and listen for coyotes in the distance, had shaped both brothers in different ways. For Ethan, they became lessons in responsibility, an understanding that preparation and caution meant survival. For Ryan, they were sparks of freedom, proof that the world was bigger than classrooms or office walls, and that he could carve his own path no matter how reckless it seemed. On the morning of their departure, the Miller home in Salt Lake City was alive with a mix of excitement and tension. Their mother moved briskly from room to room, checking bags, filling water bottles, and repeating reminders. "You'll need more sunscreen than you think, and take the extra batteries for the flashlight," she urged. Ethan tried to reassure her, shouldering his pack with calm confidence. "Mom, we'll be careful. You know I've got everything under control." Ryan rolled his eyes and tossed his smaller backpack onto the couch. "You worry too much. It's just a few days in the desert, not some expedition to Mars." His voice carried a lightness that belied his mother's concern, but deep down, Ryan loved the thrill of making light of danger. Jessica arrived just as the brothers were preparing to leave. She had been part of their lives since childhood, and while she wasn't family by blood, she often felt like the sister neither of them had. Standing on the porch with her arms crossed, she watched them with a mixture of fondness and frustration. "You two better promise me something," she said firmly. "No shortcuts, no proving points, just stick to the trails." Ryan smirked, sliding his sunglasses onto his face. "Jess, you sound like a guidebook. Relax. We'll bring you back some rocks as souvenirs." "Ryan, I'm serious," she shot back, her tone sharp. "The desert doesn't play games. People disappear out there. Don't make me add your names to that list." Ethan cut in before the exchange could escalate. "We'll be fine, Jess. I'll make sure of it." His words carried quiet authority, but in Ryan's mind they sounded like a leash being tightened. He hated the way his brother always seemed to act like the leader, as if Ryan was still a child needing supervision. The drive south carried them away from the familiar cityscape and into vast stretches of open road. Fields gave way to sandstone cliffs, and the horizon stretched endlessly beneath a blazing sky. The brothers talked about old memories, laughing at the time Ryan had tried to catch a rattlesnake with a stick, and remembering their father's stories about desert legends. Yet underneath the laughter, there was an undercurrent of difference. Ethan's voice steady and measured, Ryan's filled with restless energy, always looking for the next challenge. When they finally reached the small town of Moab, the gateway to Canyonlands, the air buzzed with the hum of tourists and adventurers preparing for their own treks. The brothers bought extra trail mix and refilled their water jugs at a local store, drawing curious glances from a clerk who had seen countless hikers come and go. "Trail's rough this time of year," the man said. "Make sure you know where you're headed." Ethan thanked him politely, but Ryan only grinned as though warnings were fuel for his confidence. That night, they camped just outside the park boundary, the stars scattered across the sky in breathtaking silence. Ethan lay awake for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and his brother's steady breathing. He thought about Jessica's words, about his mother's worry and about the weight he carried, not just his backpack but the responsibility of keeping Ryan safe. He told himself he could handle it. He always had. Ryan, on the other hand, dreamed of freedom. In his mind, the desert was not a threat, but an open canvas, a place where he could prove to himself, to Ethan, to everyone, that he wasn't just the younger brother trailing behind. He would show he could lead, that he could make choices without being second-guessed. As the fire burned low and the desert night grew colder, the brothers lay side by side, unaware that their differences, so small in that moment, would soon decide the course of everything that followed. The first light of dawn painted the desert in shades of amber and rose, casting long shadows across the sandstone cliffs. Ethan and Ryan rose early, the cool air still lingering before the sun began its merciless climb. Ethan double-checked the straps on his pack, adjusting the weight so it balanced evenly on his shoulders. Ryan, however, seemed more interested in the horizon than in his gear. His eyes lit up at the sheer vastness before them, as if the desert were daring him to explore every hidden corner. "Let's stick to the trail markers," Ethan said, pointing toward the small stone cairns that lined the path. "We keep track of our pace and ration water every few hours. That's how we get through this." Ryan smirked, brushing off the seriousness. "You're wound too tight, Ethan. Look around. This place isn't a trap, it's freedom. Why waste time walking like tourists when we could cut through there?" He gestured toward a narrow canyon that veered off the marked trail. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Because shortcuts in the desert don't work. That's how people get lost." His tone left no room for debate, but Ryan only laughed, kicking at the red dust beneath his boots. The morning passed with a steady rhythm. Their boots crunched against gravel and sand, and the scent of dry sage lingered in the air. Lizards darted across rocks, and once a hawk circled high above, its shadow gliding silently across the ground. The brothers walked together, but their minds were on different paths. Ethan focusing on timing their steps, checking the compass, conserving energy, while Ryan let his imagination wander, eyes scanning for hidden arches and secret trails. By midday, the desert revealed its first test. The sun bore down with relentless heat, and the air shimmered against the rocks. Ethan called for a rest under the shade of a scraggly juniper. He pulled out the water jug, carefully measuring a small portion for each of them. "Half a cup now, half later," he instructed. "We have to make it last." Ryan took the water, but his lips curved in frustration. "You're rationing like we're in a war zone. We brought enough, Ethan." "Stop acting like every step is life or death." Ethan stared at him, his patience thinning. "It is life or death out here. This heat can strip you down faster than you think." Ryan looked away, sipping more than Ethan had handed him. He wiped his mouth and shrugged, unwilling to argue further but unwilling to admit his brother was right. As they pressed on, fatigue began to show. Ethan kept his eyes sharp, noticing how the trail markers seemed farther apart than expected. The land stretched endlessly, with red cliffs rising like walls and valleys folding into each other in confusing patterns. Every direction looked the same. He fought down unease, telling himself they were still on course. Ryan, meanwhile, grew impatient with the monotony. "We've been walking for hours and haven't seen anything worth the hype. Where's the adventure in this? We're just trudging through sand." "Adventure doesn't mean throwing away common sense," Ethan replied curtly. He adjusted the straps on his backpack again, sweat running down his neck. "Trust me, Ryan. Trust." The desert rewards patience, not arrogance. For a moment silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the whistle of dry wind. Ryan kicked at a rock and muttered, "Maybe patience is just another word for being afraid." Ethan clenched his fists but said nothing. He knew his brother's pride often spoke louder than reason. Still, the words stung. As the sun began to dip, the desert cooled slightly, shadows stretching long across the ground. They set up a small camp, laying out their thin mats and eating from a shared bag of trail mix. Ryan leaned back, staring at the darkening sky. "You know, someday I'm going to lead us on a real adventure. No maps, no markers, just instinct." Ethan looked at him quietly, torn between admiration and worry. Instinct won't save you when the desert decides otherwise. That night, as stars burst across the sky, both brothers lay awake for a time. Ethan replayed the day's challenges in his head, already planning tomorrow's route. Ryan, on the other hand, dreamed of paths unmarked, convinced the desert held something meant only for him. Neither realized that the seeds of conflict had already been planted, waiting for the desert to test them. The fourth morning began like the others, with the sky stretching pale and endless, the desert still cool before the sun's full blaze. Ethan woke early, scanning the horizon, uneasy about the faint gusts of wind that rattled through the canyons. He'd grown up hearing how quickly the weather could turn in the Utah wilderness, how storms could roll in from nowhere and erase the very ground beneath your feet. Ryan, however, was brimming with energy. He tossed a pebble into the distance, his grin unfazed. Another day, another few miles. "Let's push harder today. I bet we'll find something worth the hike if we take that ridge." Ethan shook his head, shouldering his pack. "We stick to the plan. The markers lead toward the water caches. We can't gamble with this terrain." Ryan groaned. "You always talk like a guidebook. Sometimes you've got to stop calculating and start living." Ethan didn't bother answering. The silence between them stretched as they set out, boots crunching against the gravelly path. By mid-morning, the desert's mood shifted. The wind grew stronger, carrying with it sharp grains of sand that stung their faces. A low howl echoed across the cliffs, as if the land itself were warning them. Ethan paused, scanning the sky. Dark clouds were forming at the edges, swallowing the horizon in a haze of dust. His chest tightened. "We need shelter, now." Ryan squinted, tugging his bandana higher across his nose. "It's just wind. Don't overreact." But then the storm hit. The gusts roared like a beast unleashed, hurling sand into their eyes, mouths, and ears. Visibility shrank to nothing but a swirl of orange and red. The cairns marking the trail vanished in an instant. Ethan grabbed Ryan's arm, shouting above the deafening wind, "Stay close! Don't let go!" The brothers stumbled blindly, each step a battle against the storm's force. Sand scraped their skin raw, filled their packs, and clawed at every seam of their clothes. Ethan's eyes watered as he struggled to keep Ryan within reach. He clutched his brother's sleeve, terrified that if he lost his grip, the desert would swallow Ryan whole. For what felt like hours, they pushed forward through the chaos, until finally the storm began to ease. The wind lessened and the dust settled, revealing a silence heavier than before. When Ethan finally dared to look around, his heart dropped. The trail markers were gone. The map he had carried was shredded, pulled halfway from his pocket and ruined beyond recognition. Their compass, clipped to Ryan's belt, was cracked, its needle spinning uselessly. The desert stretched in every direction, featureless and endless, as though the storm had wiped the world clean. Ryan let out a shaky laugh, brushing sand from his hair. "Well, that was something. Guess we got our adventure, huh?" Ethan didn't share the humor. He pulled open his pack, cursing under his breath as he saw the damage. Half their food was coated in sand, their water jugs dented and leaking. What had been days of carefully measured supplies was now reduced to uncertainty. Ryan frowned, finally registering the gravity of their situation. "Okay, maybe this is bad." Ethan's voice was tight, controlled. "It's worse than bad. We're off the trail, the map's gone, the compass is useless, and our supplies are damaged. We're not in control anymore." Ryan shifted uncomfortably, trying to mask his fear with defiance. "So we figure it out. People get lost all the time and find their way back. We just have to keep moving." Ethan met his brother's eyes, seeing the bravado slipping, replaced by a flicker of doubt. He felt the weight of leadership pressing harder than ever. The storm had done more than strip away their supplies. It had exposed the fragile cracks in their bond. That night, as they huddled against a rock face, chewing what little food remained, the silence between them was thick with unspoken fear. For the first time, Ethan wondered if discipline and preparation would be enough to save them. And for the first time, Ryan began to realize that adventure carried a price he hadn't anticipated. The desert had shifted the rules, and neither of them could predict what came next. The desert felt different after the storm, as if it had swallowed every trace of the world they once knew. The horizon seemed to shift with every step, red cliffs melting into one another, sand blending into the sky. Ethan walked with the map still folded in his pocket, though he knew it was useless, its ink smeared and torn beyond recognition. He kept glancing at Ryan, who dragged his boots with restless impatience, sweat streaking his dust-caked face. "We've been going in circles," Ethan muttered, scanning the sun's position. His voice carried the edge of frustration he tried to hide. "Without markers, we're guessing at direction. We need to slow down, conserve energy." Ryan shook his head stubbornly. "No, stopping means dying. The only way out is forward. If we keep moving, we'll hit something. Another trail, a road, anything." Ethan tightened his jaw. "If we keep wandering aimlessly, we'll burn through what little we have left. We need a system." Ryan snapped, his voice raw. "Your system already failed. You had the map, the compass, the whole plan, and look where it got us. Don't act like you've got all the answers." The words cut deep, and Ethan fell silent. He knew his brother wasn't entirely wrong. The storm had stripped away all their preparation in a single sweep, but still structure was all he had to hold on to. Without it, panic would consume them. The day dragged under an unforgiving sun. Their canteens grew lighter with each sip, and Ethan began measuring the water in smaller and smaller amounts. At one stop, he poured half a cup into Ryan's bottle, only to notice later that his brother had drained nearly the entire thing when he thought Ethan wasn't looking. "You can't do that," Ethan said sharply, his tone heavy with anger and desperation. Ryan shrugged, eyes darting away. "I was thirsty." "What do you want me to do? Dehydrate on principle?" Ethan gritted his teeth. "What I want is for us to live. You can't keep thinking only about the moment. Every drop matters." Ryan kicked at a stone, his defiance faltering as guilt flickered across his face. But he didn't apologize. Pride held his tongue. even as the desert reminded them both of their fragility. By late afternoon, their steps slowed to a crawl. The heat pressed down on them like a weight, and their mouths were so dry their words rasped. The desert stretched endlessly, each dune and ridge looking the same as the last. Hope frayed like a rope pulled too tight. As the sun dipped lower, they stumbled across the ruins of an old ranch house. Its wooden beams collapsed and weathered to grey skeletons. For a brief moment, their spirits surged. "There might be something here," Ryan said, rushing forward. His voice carried a childlike eagerness, the kind born from desperation. They searched every corner, overturning splintered boards, digging through sand-filled cupboards. But there was nothing. No food, no tools, no water. Only the hollow echo of a life long abandoned. Ryan slumped against the cracked wall, his face pale with exhaustion. "It's like the desert's laughing at us," he whispered. Ethan sat beside him, his own body aching with fatigue. He forced calm into his voice, though inside he felt the same despair. "No, it's testing us. We can't give in to it." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the whistle of dry wind through broken boards. Ethan stared at his brother, seeing more than just physical strain. Ryan's shoulders drooped, his usual fire dimmed. For the first time, Ethan saw the cracks in Ryan's confidence, the fear creeping in. That night, as darkness wrapped around them, the desert's silence pressed heavily on their minds. Ethan lay awake, listening to Ryan's uneven breathing. He thought about how close they were to breaking, not just their bodies, but their bond as brothers. The desert had stripped away comfort, and now it was stripping away hope. Tomorrow would demand choices neither of them were ready to make. The next morning broke with a cruel brightness, the kind that seared the skin before the air had even warmed. Ethan sat on a rock, chewing a stale bite of trail mix, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Ryan paced in the sand nearby, restless, as if still searching for something the desert refused to give him. The silence between them had grown sharp, every word weighed with unspoken resentment. Finally, Ryan stopped pacing and turned toward his brother. "You're dragging us down, Ethan. All this rationing, all this waiting, it's killing us. We need to move. Keep moving. Take risks." "That's the only way out." Ethan stared at him, his patience snapping. "Taking risks is what got us here in the first place. You think the desert cares about your bravado? It doesn't. You waste water, you waste energy, you die. That's the truth." Ryan's face flushed with anger. "You act like you're the only one who knows how to survive. You've always been like this, bossing me around, treating me like I'm reckless, like I don't know what I'm doing." Ethan stood, his voice rising. "Because you are reckless. You don't listen, you don't plan. You just charge ahead like the world owes you something. But out here it doesn't. Out here it will kill you for one mistake." The words hung between them like a strike. Ryan clenched his fists, his pride wounded deeper than the desert's heat could scorch. "Maybe I'd rather die living my way than suffocate under your control." Ethan took a step closer, his voice low but sharp. "You think this is about control? I'm trying to keep you alive, Ryan. Do you think I want to carry this weight alone? I'm terrified every second out here. But if I let go, if I stop holding us together, we're done." For the first time, Ryan faltered. He looked at his brother, breathing hard, his anger fighting with the flicker of guilt in his eyes. But instead of softening, he turned away, kicking sand with bitter force. "I don't need you to save me. I can take care of myself." Ethan didn't chase him. His chest tightened as he watched Ryan storm off into the desert, his figure shrinking against the horizon. The sun burned hotter with every passing minute, and Ethan knew his brother's pride was leading him into danger. Yet a stubborn voice inside told him he couldn't force Ryan to stay. Hours passed before the desert cooled enough for Ethan to move. His throat ached with thirst, his body heavy with fatigue, but worry drove him forward. He followed faint boot prints across the sand, each step carrying a gnawing dread. When he finally found Ryan, the younger man was slumped beneath a ledge, his face pale and slick with sweat. His bravado had evaporated, leaving only raw exhaustion. Ethan crouched beside him, holding out a small sip of water. "Drink, slowly." Ryan's hands trembled as he took the bottle, his eyes refusing to meet Ethan's. Shame radiated from him more than the heat ever could. After a long silence, he muttered, "You were right." Ethan exhaled, relief softening his anger. "It's not about being right, it's about surviving. And we can't do that alone. We have to stay together." Ryan nodded weakly, his pride bruised but not entirely broken. For a fleeting moment they were brothers again, two men against the desert, bound not just by blood, but by the fragile truce of necessity. As night fell, the air cooled and the stars appeared once more. Ethan watched Ryan drift into uneasy sleep, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The desert had humbled them both, but Ethan knew the clash between them wasn't over. Their bond had bent, and though it held for now, the weight of survival would keep pressing until something finally snapped. The desert no longer felt like an open landscape. It had closed in around them, pressing down with a merciless weight. Ethan's body ached with every step, but he forced himself to keep going, carrying more than his share of the supplies as Ryan's strength faltered. The younger brother stumbled often, his face flushed, lips cracked, his eyes unfocused. By midday, Ryan collapsed onto the sand, gasping for breath. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, shaking his shoulder. "Come on, Ryan, get up." "We can't stop here." Ryan's voice was hoarse, barely audible. I can't. My head's spinning. Everything's burning." His hands trembled as he tried to wipe the sweat from his brow, but his body refused to cooperate. Panic surged through Ethan, though he kept his voice steady. "It's heat stroke. You need shade." He scanned the horizon desperately, spotting a cluster of rocks not far off. With all the strength he had left, he pulled Ryan's arm over his shoulder and dragged him toward the shelter. The rocks offered only a sliver of shadow, but it was enough. Ethan laid Ryan down, propping his head against his pack, shielding him from the blazing sun with his own body. He poured a few drops of water onto a rag and pressed it to his brother's lips. "Sip." "Just a little." Ryan obeyed, his eyes half-lidded. "You should go. Find help. Leave me here. You'll move faster without me." The words hit Ethan like a knife. "Don't you dare say that. I'm not leaving you. We got into this together, and we're getting out together." Ryan shook his head weakly. "You don't understand. I'm slowing you down." "You'll die if you keep dragging me." Ethan's throat tightened, anger and desperation mixing until his voice cracked. "You think I'd survive out there knowing I abandoned you? No. If we die together." Silence stretched between them, broken only by Ryan's labored breathing. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brother's forehead, his own body trembling from exhaustion. Inside, he wrestled with a storm of fear. The desert wasn't just testing their endurance, it was tearing at their loyalty, forcing choices no brother should ever face. Hours passed as Ethan sat beside Ryan, rationing sips of water, whispering words of encouragement even when he wasn't sure Ryan could hear. Memories of their childhood drifted into his mind. Ryan chasing fireflies in their backyard, Ryan laughing uncontrollably when he fell off his bike, Ryan's endless energy that once felt unstoppable. Now that same brother lay fragile and broken, and Ethan's heart clenched with helplessness. As the heat eased with the setting sun, Ryan stirred. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Why do you always carry me, Ethan? Even when we were kids, you never let me fall without trying to catch me." Ethan swallowed hard. "Because you're my brother, and because one day when I can't stand anymore, I know you'll carry me." Ryan's cracked lips twitched in the faintest smile, and for a fleeting moment, the weight between them lightened. But Ethan knew the desert wouldn't let them rest for long. Their supplies were running out, and Ryan's condition was worsening. Tomorrow would bring another trial, another demand for strength Ethan wasn't sure he had. As the stars rose over the silent wasteland, Ethan sat awake, listening to his brother's shallow breaths. He felt the crushing truth pressing in. This journey had reached its breaking point, and survival might demand a choice he could no longer avoid. The next morning brought a fragile sense of relief. As Ethan guided Ryan through the cooling air of dawn, they stumbled upon something that shimmered faintly in the sand. A shallow depression, darkened with moisture, glistened under the early light. Ethan dropped to his knees, clawing at the earth with trembling hands until a thin trickle of water welled up. Ryan let out a rasping laugh, his voice raw but filled with sudden life. You found it. You actually found it. Ethan cupped his hands, offering the muddy water to his brother. Slowly sip it, don't waste it. Ryan obeyed, the liquid spilling down his chin as he drank greedily. For the first time in days, color returned to his cheeks, and his eyes brightened with renewed energy. Ethan drank next, the taste gritty but miraculous. The desert had finally given them a gift, and for a brief moment, hope took root. They filled their bottles carefully, guarding each drop like treasure. Ryan's shoulders lifted, his spirit surging as though he'd been reborn. See? I told you we'd find something. The desert doesn't just kill, it provides if you fight long enough. Ethan managed a tired smile. Maybe. Or maybe it's testing us again. Either way, we move forward while we have strength. With renewed energy, they pressed on. Their steps felt lighter, their voices rising in conversation that had been absent for days. Ryan even joked about the sorry state of his beard, scratching at the uneven stubble with a grin. Ethan allowed himself to believe just for a moment that they might make it out after all. But the desert, patient and merciless, does not release its grip so easily. By late afternoon, the terrain shifted. Deep ravines cut across their path, sheer cliffs rising like prison walls. The trail they thought they had rediscovered twisted into dead ends, each turn leading them deeper into a maze of stone. Ryan's optimism began to falter as the sun sank lower. We'll just climb out, he said, scanning the cliffs. He put his hands on the rock face, attempting to scramble upward, but the stone crumbled beneath his grip. He slid back down, cursing under his breath. Ethan reached out, steadying him. You'll fall and break your neck, we can't risk that. Frustration boiled in Ryan's voice. So what then? Sit here and wait to starve? Ethan's gaze hardened. We conserve energy, we look for a path, and we don't waste strength on impossible climbs. That's how we survive. Ryan slammed his fist against the rock, his brief hope collapsing into despair. Every time I think we're closer, it's just another wall. I can't do this forever, Ethan, I can't. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat, forcing his voice steady. Then we don't think about forever. We think about the next step. One more step. One more hour. One more night. That's how we keep going. The words carried weight, but deep down, Ethan felt his own hope slipping. The water they had found gave them life, but it hadn't given them direction. They were alive, yes, but trapped in a labyrinth with no sign of escape. As night fell, the air cooled, and they huddled together against the base of the cliffs. Ryan's face was hidden in shadow, his voice quiet. You think the desert's just playing with us? Giving us a taste of hope just to rip it away? Ethan looked up at the stars, sharp and cold against the black sky. His chest ached with the truth he didn't want to speak. Maybe. Or maybe it's waiting to see which of us breaks first. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of that thought. The desert had offered them water, but not salvation. And Ethan knew the next days would demand more than strength. They would demand something neither of them was ready to give. The desert had become a world of silence, broken only by the rasp of dry wind and the sound of their dragging footsteps. Ethan's legs ached with every step, but he forced himself forward, keeping Ryan upright with an arm wrapped tightly around his shoulders. Ryan's weight pressed heavier with each passing hour, his once restless energy now replaced by a fragile shuffle. By midday, Ryan collapsed once more, his body trembling. He leaned against a rock, gasping, his voice a whisper. Ethan, I can't anymore. Ethan knelt beside him, gripping his hand. Yes, you can. We just keep going. One more step, one more mile. That's all we need. Ryan's cracked lips curved into a faint, broken smile. You sound like Dad, always pushing, always believing. But Ethan, look at me. His eyes, glazed and hollow, met his brother's. I'm done. My body's giving up, and you know it. Ethan shook his head violently, refusing to accept it. No, I won't leave you. We're going to make it out of here together. Ryan coughed, his voice breaking with effort. If you stay, you'll die here too. You have strength left. I don't. Don't waste it on me. The words pierced Ethan deeper than any wound. His chest tightened, his vision blurred. He wanted to scream at the desert, at fate, at anything that had brought them here. "Don't ask me to do that. Don't you dare!" Ryan's hand gripped his arm weakly. "Listen to me. I'm not asking because I want to die. I'm asking because I want you to live. Please, Ethan, don't make my fight meaningless." Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. Every memory of their childhood flashed through his mind. Racing bikes down their street, Ryan sneaking cookies late at night, the way he always looked up to his older brother with trust that never wavered. Now, that same brother was asking him to walk away. Tears burned Ethan's eyes as he pressed his forehead against Ryan's. "I can't lose you." Ryan's voice was barely audible. "You won't. Because wherever you go, I'll be there, every step, every breath. Carry me with you, Ethan. That's how we both survive." The weight of those words broke something inside him. Ethan wanted to refuse, to cling tighter, to fight the impossible. But deep down, he knew Ryan was right. His body trembled with the guilt of the choice forming inside him, the choice to live while his brother stayed behind. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in fire and gold, Ryan squeezed his hand one last time. "Go, while you still can." Ethan's tears fell silently onto the sand. He kissed his brother's forehead, his voice shaking. "I'll never forgive myself." Ryan's faint smile lingered. "Then don't. Just live. That's enough." With his chest torn open by grief, Ethan forced himself to stand. His legs felt like lead, his soul heavier than the desert itself. He looked back at his brother one final time. Ryan sitting against the stone, his face calm, his body still. Every instinct screamed at him to return, to refuse, to die beside him. But Ryan's words echoed louder than the wind. "Carry me with you." Ethan turned and walked into the vast emptiness, each step shattering him further. He did not look back again. The desert swallowed the sound of his footsteps, leaving behind silence. And in that silence, Ethan knew his life would never again belong fully to him. It would always carry the weight of his brother's sacrifice. When the Miller brothers failed to return from their hike, the desert quickly transformed from adventure into tragedy for those who loved them. By the second day, without word, their mother reported them missing, her voice trembling as she described her sons to the authorities. Search teams mobilized, volunteers and professionals scouring the canyons, helicopters sweeping the skies, and dogs tracing faint trails. For days the desert echoed with the calls of rescuers shouting their names. Jessica joined every search she could. She hiked until her legs gave out, calling into the wind, praying for a response. At night she attended vigils in Moab, candles flickering in the town square as neighbors whispered words of hope. She clutched the last picture she had of the brothers, taken the morning of their departure, and refused to believe it was the final one, but the desert gave nothing back. Days turned to weeks, weeks into months. The search scaled down, then stopped, leaving only reports filled with maps marked in red ink. One by one, volunteers drifted away, and silence returned. The Miller family was left with unanswered questions, their home filled with an emptiness that could not be measured. Linda, their mother, held on longer than anyone. Every night she left the porch light burning, whispering a prayer that her sons would find their way back. Her grief was quiet but constant, a steady ache that never left her chest. She spoke of Ethan and Ryan in the present tense, as though refusing to let time turn them into memory. Their father's absence, already a wound, deepened the weight of their disappearance. With him gone for years, it had always been Ethan who held the family steady, and Ryan who brought its spark. Now both were missing, and Linda felt as though her heart had been carved in two. The community of Moab carried their story for a while. Tourists passing through heard whispers of the brothers lost in the canyons. Hikers mentioned them when discussing the dangers of the desert. Some spoke with admiration for their courage, others with judgment, calling them reckless. But as time stretched on, their names faded from daily conversation, replaced by new headlines and fresh tragedies. Jessica refused to let them be forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of their disappearance, she organized a small gathering in the desert, placing flowers at the edge of the trail where they were last seen. She spoke of them in the past tense reluctantly, her voice breaking as she remembered Ryan's laughter, Ethan's steady calm. Somewhere out there, she would say, her gaze fixed on the horizon. They're waiting to be found. But 3 years passed, and still the desert held its silence. No remains, no belongings, no signs, just endless sand and stone. It was as if the land itself had claimed them, burying their story in its depths. Linda aged rapidly in those years, her face marked by grief more than time. Neighbors described her as a woman living with half her soul missing. She rarely left the house except to visit Jessica, and together they shared long conversations about memories, clinging to them like fragile threads. Ethan and Ryan became legends whispered in Moab's cafes and gas stations. Those Miller boys, locals would say, shaking their heads, vanished without a trace. The desert doesn't give back what it takes. It seemed that was how the story would end. 2 brothers swallowed by the vastness, remembered only in photos and sorrow. But fate had been patient. 3 years after their disappearance, in the quiet of an ordinary evening, the impossible happened. A figure stumbled into a small Utah town, gaunt and scarred by the sun, his eyes hollow but unmistakable. Ethan Miller had returned. The town of Green River, a quiet stop along the interstate, rarely saw strangers stumble in on foot. So when a gaunt figure appeared at the edge of town one evening, his clothes torn and his face weathered by years of sun, people paused. His steps were slow, uneven, as though each movement cost him more than he had to give. For a moment the locals thought he might be another drifter lost along the road, but then someone gasped, their hand flying to their mouth. "It's him! My God! It's Ethan Miller!" Within minutes, word spread like wildfire. People who had whispered about the Miller brothers for 3 long years rushed into the street, drawn by the miracle standing before them. Ethan swayed as he tried to speak, his voice rasping. "Water!" A man hurried forward with a bottle, and Ethan clutched it with trembling hands, drinking as though it were life itself. His eyes darted around the crowd, haunted and hollow, searching for something familiar in a sea of faces. The sheriff arrived quickly, guiding Ethan toward safety. "Son, you need a hospital." "You're lucky you made it back at all." But Ethan shook his head weakly. "My brother. Ryan." The words trailed off into silence, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. News cameras swarmed the next day. Reporters filled the streets of Moab, broadcasting the story across the nation. Lost for 3 years in the Utah desert, one of the Miller brothers has returned alive. Headlines called it miraculous, a modern tale of survival against impossible odds. For his family, the moment was surreal. Linda rushed into the hospital room, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her son. Ethan, I knew. I never stopped believing you were alive." Her hands trembled as she cupped his face, memorizing every scar, every hollow curve where strength had once been. Ethan held her, but his eyes carried a weight she could not ease. "Mom, I'm sorry." His voice cracked, as though the words were too small to hold the truth he carried. Jessica stood near the doorway, her own tears blurring her vision. When Ethan saw her, his expression softened for the first time. "Jess," she rushed to him, clutching his hand. "You came back. I prayed for this every day." "You came back." Ethan squeezed her hand, his grip fragile yet desperate. "Not all of us did." The unspoken truth hung in the air. Ryan was gone. Ethan's return was not a triumph. It was a wound reopened. The town treated him as both a hero and a ghost. Some stared in awe, whispering about his strength, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Questions circled in hushed tones. Why him? Why not Ryan? What had happened out there? Ethan avoided interviews, his voice faltering when pressed. "Not yet," he muttered each time. "Not ready." He spent hours staring out the hospital window at the desert beyond, as if the land still held part of his soul captive. Jessica sat with him often, her presence steady. One evening she asked softly, "Do you want to talk about it?" Ethan shook his head, his eyes brimming with pain. "If I start, I don't know if I can stop." Still, whispers turned into speculation. Some called him a miracle. Others wondered if survival had demanded choices too dark to speak aloud. The weight of those stairs pressed harder on Ethan than the desert sun ever had. For the first time in years, Ethan was back among the living. But he carried with him something no one else could see, the burden of memory and the truth about what survival had really cost. The hospital bed gave Ethan shelter, but it could not ease the turmoil inside him. Doctors measured his vitals, marveled at how a man could endure so long in the desert, but none of their questions touched the wound that throbbed deepest. He wasn't battling dehydration or malnutrition anymore. He was battling memory. At night, when the hallways were quiet, Ethan jolted awake from dreams so vivid they felt real. He heard Ryan's voice in the wind, saw his brother's figure against the cliffs, always turning away, always slipping beyond reach. He would sit upright, drenched in sweat, clutching his chest as if he could hold back the crushing guilt. During the day, reporters crowded outside, demanding answers. The sheriff visited, trying to piece together the official story. Ethan gave fragments: the storm, the loss of supplies, the endless wandering. But when the questions turned to Ryan, his throat closed. "I can't. Not yet," he muttered, his voice strained. Jessica was the only one who pushed gently, never forcing. One evening she found him staring out the window, the desert stretching far beyond the horizon. "Ethan," she said softly, "you don't have to carry this alone. Tell me what really happened." He shook his head, his jaw trembling. "If I say it out loud, Jess, then it's real, and I don't know if I can live with that." She reached for his hand, her voice steady. "It's already real. You lived it. Keeping it inside doesn't erase it. It just eats at you." Ethan's eyes filled, but no words came. Instead, he pressed his forehead against the glass, watching the sunlight bleed over the rocks. Inside, the weight grew unbearable. When the town hailed him as a miracle, Ethan flinched. At the grocery store, strangers clasped his hand, praising his strength. In church, prayers were spoken in his name, yet every congratulations landed like a stone in his stomach. He knew the truth. Survival had not been a triumph. It had been a bargain, one paid with his brother's life. One night, Linda sat beside his bed, her hands clasped tightly. "I prayed every day for this, Ethan. I prayed you'd come home. And here you are." Her words cut him deeper than any judgment. He broke, his voice trembling. "But Mom, Ryan's not. I left him. He asked me to go, and I did. I should have stayed. I should have found another way." Tears filled her eyes as she cupped his face. "You did what you had to do. Don't let guilt erase the gift he gave you." Ethan pulled away, burying his face in his hands. But what kind of gift is it, when living feels like betrayal? Silence lingered, heavy and raw. His mother's tears fell freely, but she said nothing more. Days blurred into weeks, and slowly Ethan regained strength. But with every pound gained, with every ounce of health restored, the guilt sharpened. He carried Ryan's final words like chains: "Carry me with you." And though Ethan's body was healing, his soul remained trapped in the desert, beside the brother who had given him permission to live. He began writing in a small journal, not for the world but for himself. Each page carried fragments, memories, confessions, regrets. Some nights he filled entire sheets with Ryan's name, over and over, as if trying to call him back. Other nights he wrote nothing at all, staring at the blank page as though it mirrored the emptiness inside. Ethan knew he couldn't avoid the truth forever. The world demanded a story, and his silence would not last. The question was no longer whether he would tell it, but whether he could survive speaking it out loud. Ethan's return rippled far beyond his family. In Moab, whispers filled cafes, grocery stores, and gas stations. Some spoke with awe, calling him a man blessed with extraordinary strength. Others lowered their voices, suspicion creeping into their words. How had he survived when Ryan hadn't? What had really happened out there? The local newspaper ran features praising Ethan's endurance, but online forums buzzed with doubt. Strangers speculated, some cruelly suggesting he had abandoned his brother to save himself. Ethan didn't need to read the words to feel them. He saw the questions in people's eyes when they passed him on the street. Gratitude mixed with unease, as though his survival was both miracle and mystery. Jessica shielded him as best she could. When people pressed too hard, she snapped, "You don't know what he's been through, none of you do." But even she couldn't silence the whispers entirely. At night, when she sat with Ethan on the porch, the weight of those doubts lingered in the silence between them. Ethan rarely left the house, retreating further inward. The desert still clung to him, its silence echoing in his mind. But the world wouldn't stop knocking. The sheriff returned, asking for details to close the case. "Ethan," he said carefully, "people deserve to know what happened." "Closure matters." Ethan's response was barely above a whisper. "Closure isn't the same as truth." The sheriff studied him, frowning. "If you're holding back—" "I'm not ready," Ethan interrupted, his jaw tight. His heart pounded at the thought of saying aloud what Ryan had asked of him, the final moments that still shredded him from the inside. Jessica pressed him differently. One evening she leaned closer, her voice steady but gentle. "You don't have to carry their judgment, Ethan, but you can't keep running from it either. People will talk until they hear your voice." His eyes filled with torment. "What if they're right, Jess? What if I did abandon him?" She grabbed his hand firmly. "No. Ryan made his choice, and he gave you the chance to live. Don't twist that into betrayal." But her words didn't soothe him. That night he dreamed again of Ryan, his face pale, his voice breaking. "Go, while you still can." Ethan woke in a cold sweat, clutching his chest, certain the desert still owned part of him. At church the following Sunday, whispers swelled louder. An older woman approached Ethan with trembling hands. "You're proof of God's will," she said, her eyes shining. "He chose you to return." Her kindness cut like a blade. Ethan forced a nod, but inside, the thought consumed him. If I was chosen, why not Ryan? Later, outside the church, two men spoke just loud enough for Ethan to hear. 3 years out there and only one comes back? Doesn't add up. The other replied, "Maybe the desert didn't take him, maybe his brother did." Ethan froze, his chest tightening until he could barely breathe. Jessica's hand on his arm steadied him, but the damage was done. Their suspicions mirrored his darkest fear. That evening, Ethan broke the silence at home. "Jess, maybe they deserve to hate me. Maybe I don't deserve to be here." His voice was raw, hollow. Jessica turned toward him sharply. "Stop. That's the desert talking, not you. Survival isn't clean, Ethan. It's ugly and cruel, but it doesn't make you guilty for breathing." He looked at her, his eyes heavy with grief. "Then why does it feel like punishment?" Jessica didn't answer right away. She only held his hand tighter, knowing that words alone could never untangle the knot inside him. The community watched, waiting for answers, while Ethan wrestled with the unbearable truth inside his chest. And though silence had protected him, it was also suffocating him, pushing him closer to the edge of a confession he feared might break him completely. The weight of silence had become unbearable. Ethan could no longer walk through town without feeling the eyes that followed him, filled with admiration or suspicion, sometimes both at once. He carried his brother's ghost with every step, and the whispers of others only echoed the guilt already clawing at his chest. One evening, Jessica found him sitting alone in the backyard, his journal open on his lap. The pages were filled with shaky handwriting, words smudged where tears had fallen. She sat down beside him, waiting. Finally, Ethan's voice broke the stillness. "I can't keep hiding it, Jess. If I don't speak, it'll kill me. But if I do, I don't know what will happen." Her gaze was steady, unwavering. "Then tell me first. No judgment, just the truth." Ethan swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he closed the journal. His eyes glazed over as if he were staring back into the desert itself. "Ryan, he was dying. His body couldn't take it anymore. I tried, I gave him water, I carried him, I refused to leave. But he made me promise, he begged me to go. He told me to carry him with me. Not his body, but his memory, and I—" His voice cracked. "I walked away." Jessica's breath caught, but she didn't speak. She let him continue, knowing the words were tearing him apart even as they freed him. Ethan's tears streamed unchecked. Every step I took, I hated myself. I felt like a traitor. I wanted to turn back, but I knew if I did, we'd both die there. Ryan chose for me, Jess. He chose to let me live. But how do I live with that? How do I explain to the world that survival wasn't courage? It was surrender. Jessica reached for his hand, her grip firm. It wasn't surrender. It was sacrifice. Ryan gave you a gift and you honored it by surviving. You didn't betray him. You carried his choice. He shook his head violently. No one will understand. They'll think I abandoned him. They'll think I chose myself over my own brother. Her voice sharpened, fierce. Then let them talk. The only one who knew the truth was Ryan, and he trusted you. He gave you permission. That means something, Ethan. That means everything. For a long time, Ethan sat in silence, his chest heaving with the release of years of torment. Finally, he whispered, I've hated myself every day since, but when I saw his face at the end, he wasn't angry. He was at peace, and that's the only reason I kept walking. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled softly. Then let that be your answer. Not the whispers, not the stares. His face, his peace, that's what you hold on to. Ethan's shoulders shook as he leaned into her, the dam of silence finally breaking. For the first time since his return, the truth was no longer locked inside him. It lived in the air, heavy, but shared. The confession did not erase the pain, nor did it silence the doubts of others. But in that moment, Ethan felt something shift. The burden was no longer his alone. Jessica whispered, her voice almost a vow, We'll carry him together now. And Ethan, though still broken, allowed himself to believe it. The truth was out, fragile and raw. And though it did not bring closure, it brought the first flicker of release. But survival demanded more than confession. It demanded that he learn how to live again. Months passed before Ethan began to step back into the world. His confession to Jessica had loosened the weight he carried, but it hadn't erased it. He knew it never would. Yet he also understood that Ryan's sacrifice demanded more than silence and grief. It demanded action. He started small, giving talks at local hiking groups, warning them about the dangers of the Utah desert. At first his voice trembled, his hands shaking as he described dehydration, storms, and the deceptive vastness of the canyons. But as he spoke, he noticed something. People listened. They leaned in, absorbing every word. His pain became not just a burden, but a lesson. Soon Ethan partnered with rangers and survival instructors, developing workshops for hikers. He walked trails with groups, teaching them how to read the land, ration supplies, and respect the desert's unforgiving nature. This place isn't your enemy, he told them, but it will test you, and if you don't respect it, it will take everything. For the first time since his return, Ethan felt Ryan beside him, not as a ghost haunting him, but as a presence urging him forward. He often ended his talks with a quiet tribute. My brother didn't make it out, but his choice is why I'm here today. Everything I teach you, I carry from him. His mother, Linda, attended his first public seminar. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her surviving son transform grief into guidance. Afterward, she held him close. Ethan, you're giving Ryan a voice he never had. You're keeping him alive. Ethan's reply was quiet but certain. That's all I can do now. The whispers in town slowly shifted. Where once people had judged him, they now began to respect him. Some still questioned, of course. Doubt never fully disappears. But most saw in Ethan a man reshaped by survival, carrying scars that could not be seen but could be felt in every word he spoke. Jessica remained by his side through it all. One evening, as they walked along the edge of Canyonlands, she asked, "Do you ever feel free of it?" Ethan paused, gazing at the horizon where the desert stretched endlessly. "Not free. I don't think I ever will. But I don't need to be free. I just need to live in a way that honors him." Jessica smiled softly, slipping her hand into his. "Then you already are." The desert no longer felt like a tomb to Ethan. It remained harsh, yes, but it also became a teacher, a reminder of resilience, love, and the price of survival. Every time he stepped onto its trails, he felt Ryan's presence, sometimes in the wind, sometimes in the silence, always in the beating of his own heart. In the end, Ethan's story wasn't one of triumph. It wasn't about conquering the desert or defeating nature. It was about endurance, sacrifice, and the bond between brothers that even death could not sever. Survival, he came to realize, is never free. It leaves marks, scars deeper than skin, debts that can never be repaid. But survival also carries a responsibility to live with purpose, to honor those who could not. And so Ethan walked forward, carrying Ryan with him step by step into the life that had been given back to him at such a cost. Before you go, if you were moved by Ethan and Ryan's story, remember to subscribe to our channel. Each tale we share is more than just survival. It's a glimpse into the strength and fragility of the human spirit. And don't stop here. Click the video on your screen now to continue this journey with another story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Because sometimes the most powerful truths aren't found in legends, but in the lives of those who endured and those who were lost along the way.